Hi guys, if you saw my last video, there's a lot of things coming to epicseven, but something that I didn't end up covering, but I meant to cover was the balance patch. Truth be told, I've already kind of sat on this and let it settle a little bit. There are some interesting changes here, but overall I'd say before we even get into it, this is definitely not the patch that I thought it was going to be, and I'll explain why in a little bit. First and foremost, here's the full list of characters that have been changed. Judge Cades, Lionheart Sermia, Pirate Captain Fla, Abigail, Alencia, Shooting Star Cades, and then Otherworld Machinery, which is Yuna's artifact, I believe, and Fan of Light and Dark, which is I think it's the Amid artifact, I believe it should be. Now, here's the thing. We started off with a couple characters that, truth be told, did kind of sound like maybe they needed a little bit of love, and honestly, a lot of the characters in the game have either received a buff or have been given love in some way, shape, or form. So at this point, we're definitely either looking towards buffing 4-star characters or 3-star characters, which, again, since their announcement about specialty changes, maybe that's what they'll be leaning towards more. But specifically for this balance change, they fixated again still on the ML5s and stuff, which is okay. But the first character we have here is Judge Cades. Now, as you can tell, Judge Cades in recent times has kind of pegged herself as more of a cleave character, and she's always kind of been like that. But for me specifically, I've used a lot of Judge Cades in my day, and although she is definitely not for the average person, because again, she had difficulties with stuff like being fast, and she gets countered by Zeo, and she doesn't have ignore ER. They looked to, I guess, resolve a lot of these problems by, well, just giving her ignore ER. And the first change that they have now is with her S2. Not only does she now dispel buffs, which is still amazing, now she ignore effect resistances when she does it, but now she has a 75% chance to defense break, which is what she had before, but they've removed her ability to apply a unable to counterattack buff on the enemy. And also, rather than have the extra turn on her soul burn, they now made it so that she gains 25% CR per target that she hits when she uses her S2. Now, at a glance, there are a couple weird feelings about this change. Number one, again, while they did add the decreased hit chance buff in exchange for the counterattack thing, sometimes being counterattacked at all will lead you to getting one shot, and honestly, a decreased hit chance is not the same as unable to, it's not the same as unable to be counterattacked. However, again, you are still basically playing to that same 50-50 now. There's basically no difference where it's now, will the enemy miss you as opposed to will you get 15%ed when you try to land the unable to counterattack. But truth be told, a lot of players, myself included, were using her specifically against characters like Candy or Abyssal Euphine. And this kind of removes some of its viability, because if the full damage, if the full damage Navy Captain Landy or Abyssal Euphine does an Elbrus or a counter onto me, I'm dead most of the time as a cleaver. Now, I don't really know what the exact thinking of this was. I don't know if because of the fact that they increased the damage on her S3, if this means that they're trying to make her more of a damage dealer, but truth be told, I don't know. It feels like the hit itself will no longer, provide you or allow you to get countered, which is nice because, it can't trigger a counterattack. But most of the time what happens after a Judge Cades uses her S2 is that someone like a Ludwig will use her or will use his Soulburn S1 to get an attack before he uses S2. And again, you had some luxury in knowing before that it was impossible for the Ludwig to get countered, but maybe now things will be a little bit better because now you have 2 additional chances, or you technically won't die in the first chance, which is okay. It's really hard is kind of what I'm trying to gauge here, specifically with Judge Cades, because it's not like they full-blown outright buffed the skill, because again, you can now be countered, where in the past... Oops, sorry, I dropped something. Where in the past, technically speaking, Judge Cades allowed you to never get countered, assuming that you went 4 for 4 on, or 8 for 8 in terms of your debuff. But now you have the ignore resistance, which is nice because now you don't need any effectiveness at all. But now it feels like there's a chance for your team to die if you're unlucky with your S3 on Judge Cades, or you technically may die a little bit easier if you end up deciding to use your Ludwig or your Jacko or someone after. it's kind of a hard thing to say. We'll have to see as it comes out or as people end up testing her. I myself am probably going to be testing her because right now I'm using a really goofy looking top model Luluka cleave. But in general, I think this is a nice change. Just the fact that she's getting love at all, I think is really interesting. And to be honest, guys, of course, you know, like the whole ignore effect resistance thing was never going to come with a guaranteed death break. It was never going to come with a, oh, well, you get to guaranteed unable to counterattack someone, and you also, you know, have a guaranteed chance to death break the enemy team. It is what it is. It is what it is. It's unfortunate, but truth be told, I think that this is an interesting change. We'll see if the damage numbers are actually significant enough to change things up, but I like the fact that it also can't trigger a counterattack, so at least on S2 itself, you won't die. The next thing that we have here is Lionheart Sarmia, and this is probably where I have to take a brief pause to explain the interest or the interesting part about this. Here's the truth. epicseven, in an effort to make things more interesting and controversial, not really controversial, I guess, but to make things super spicy, I should say, have introduced concepts that have never been seen before. You know, knockwall, for instance. Seal, plus you can't react, and outside of a few core characters, which sometimes don't even counter knockwall, she has like virtually few to like no real counters. You have characters like Emma Luna, who are absolutely ridiculous. They really don't have any counter, and the only counter you have are things like, you know, Bellion, which Frida completely counters that now, and banning her. But Lionheart Sarmia is one of the characters that, because of a character like Emma Politis, who reduces a lot of, or reduces, I guess, passive or focus, I don't remember, I think it's fighting spirit generation, specifically, or actually, I guess she reduces all resource generation. But the fact that Emma Politis exists in the game makes Lionheart Sarmia's life absolutely terrible. Now, here's the thing that's really interesting about this, is that rather than accept that Lionheart Sarmia is dead to rights and will never be picked again, they've actually gone with the, hey, even though originally people were saying that Emma Politis would counter a character like Lionheart Sarmia, or Emma Politis could character, whatever, they just decided to change Lionheart Sarmia from being a fighting spirit character. Which is interesting because now she's not a resource character, and what she is now is a cooldown-based character. Which is interesting because they've never done this before, you know what I mean? It's not like, oh, well, you know, knockwall counters, you know, Mercedes, or knockwall counters X character, so we're gonna make it so that now they don't get countered. Like, they've never done this before. A few characters in the past have definitely been created with this bypass in mind. Mercedes and Ed specifically and come to mind when it comes to like, oh, well, you can't be countered by this character's ability, except that their attacks are extra attacks and not counters, so technically you will get affected even if you end up, you get the point here, right? They've never decided to, after the fact or retroactively, change characters so that they now bypass some of their old former counters. And Lionheart Sarmia is the first character to do this, and it's really interesting. Again, now, instead of having to use some of the old artifacts, like myself personally, I've definitely used some artifacts like Durandal to give myself a combat readiness push. I've actually been using Lionheart Sarmia specifically as like an anti-measure or an anti-cleave measure when I pick Ran and someone picks something like Lionheart Sarmia, or sorry, they'll pick Ed. I'll just run the Lionheart Sarmia into the Ed, and then my 250 Lionheart Sarmia cuts ahead and I get to like cleave his team. That's basically really nice, or the buff to her combat readiness is specifically really nice for that purpose, because now my Lionheart Sarmia is fast, or even faster, or I can give her now like Sigurd Scythe or something, whatever the case is, Golden Rose. But just the changes in general are fantastic and they're interesting. I don't know if I'm going to like this trend in the future, because it feels like there are certain characters that you'd otherwise go out of your way to pick specifically for the purpose of countering old ML5s or characters like this, and there's simply no telling right now if these characters won't get changed in the future to basically bypass what you originally pulled them for. Now, to be clear, I don't think anyone specifically was going out of their way to build or pull for someone like Lionheart Sarmia with the purpose of, I guess no one was really pulling for ML Politis to counter Lionheart Sarmia particularly, but it sets a dangerous precedent in the future, because imagine if someone like ML Sharoon, for instance, gets pulled for because you wanted to counter someone like a Tywin, or you wanted to counter someone like Death Dealer Ray. But then all of a sudden, Death Dealer Ray's S3 says, oh, well, actually, it does not affect, like, it can't be affected by any passive. That's a little scary sounding, and a lot of people recommend, and myself included, like content creators, I should say specifically, recommend, or even friends and people that you play in RTA will recommend you characters on the basis of what the character does. And if this is a precedent where in the future they end up releasing character, or they end up changing characters in such a way that they remove the core functionality, and now like characters that you may have pulled in the past, Moonlight specifically that you've pulled in the past to counter new characters, like if that ends up going away and all of a sudden you've got like a Shroon who, okay, thankfully Shroon counters other things, but imagine if the only thing that Shroon countered was Death Dealer Ray, and all of a sudden you had no use for your Shroon, you'd kind of be like, that's weird. Why did they do that? Now I have a useless ML5. In any case, they could always change Shroon in the future, but you get what I mean, and it's a little bit scary for those of you that are interested in your characters, or you're pulling currency, and you're trying to think of who should be or who is worth pulling for. But just keep in mind that this is something that could happen, as you're seeing right now with Lionheart Sturmia. Excuse me. The next thing that they also changed, which was, I think this is arguably, I think the most controversial change that I saw, or I saw the most people talk about, was this whole Pirate Captain Fla change. Now, if you aren't familiar with it, what it says is now, instead of her S1 stealing a buff, what you now have is she has a defense break for 1 turn, and you can now soul burn it to give you the extra turn def break. Now, this is a weird change. Number one, because there were definitely people that were using Summertime Iseria's artifact alongside the soul burn from Pirate Captain to land or throw multiple bombs onto multiple targets so you could stun them. But truth be told, there aren't that many people that play Pirate Captain Fla in general, so it is what it is. They've changed her, and it's better than not being played at all. However, I will be the first to say that I used to run like a fast 250 speed, high effectiveness Pirate Captain Fla for the exact purpose that I'm describing to you, and that definitely doesn't work now. The defense break is nice, but it's on her S1, and 1 defense break is not a good enough reason for me to use P-Flan. But as you see on her S3, they've also changed how she works, where now she has built-in crit hit resistance, kind of similar to Candy. And now when she has an S3, you can basically steal a buff from the target, and you, like, but that's only assuming that they have a buff, or when you S3, assuming that they have a buff, you activate Time to Pillage, which is only activated once every 3 turns, and you give effectiveness to all your allies, spectacular, but you steal a buff from the target. That's okay, I guess. Like, technically speaking, unless if I'm mistakening what's going on here, she has the chance to steal a bunch of, or she gets to steal 1 buff, but I'm not sure if that means exactly, if that means you steal 4 buffs for Pirate Captain Fla, or if that means you're stealing 1 buff from 1 target. I don't know exactly the metrics of that. It sounds a little bit goofy because, again, it formerly was a single target steal, but I'm not sure what this is. But honestly, stealing 1 buff doesn't sound super amazing. In general, people weren't using the steal buff for that much reason anyways, since it was a 75% chance. And net total, technically speaking here, you lose the Aureus, or the shared damage that you got from her S3, which, I mean, truth be told, guys, again, I don't think this character was used at all, and now she's more of like a tank debuff, DPS, which is kind of what she looks like now, but she can also steal buffs from the enemy, so maybe she makes it easier for your allies to, debuff, because now you steal or you remove immunities from players. Whatever the case is, this is also, I believe, a pseudo form of debuffing, but the thing is if you're trying to remove immunity specifically, if I'm not mistaken, stealing the buff comes after you apply, so technically it's not as though she is now being given a strip. It just means that you set up another character to steal, but it's a weird concept for a buff, and it's definitely not a straight buff or like an amazing, fantastic buff by any means. You're gonna have to see how this, or we're all gonna have to see how this plans out, and truth be told, I don't really know what this is in terms of value, because I don't know if the effectiveness is going to be huge. It's not like it's a super effectiveness buff, and I guess truth be told, sometimes you'll use someone like Pirate Captain Fla with Summertime Iseria or some other cleave characters, but most of these characters already have effectiveness, and you don't really need the effectiveness buff anyways. Whatever the case is, I honestly rate the Pirate Captain Fla buff to be pretty middle of the road. I'm sure that there's probably a slower player or a more standardish, like slow player that plays standard, or plays a more Laia heavy kind of composition where maybe this is helpful after turn 1, where now you have like a stuck defense break that is pretty impactful. But with the advent of, characters like Alena, with, cleansers out and about, Laia herself included, I don't know how relevant this is going to be, but we'll have to see. Because again, I'm not sure how relevant the stealing buff thing is, but maybe you could steal a buff from Candy and ends up being really important. Maybe people start having to put back on immunity onto their units. Who knows? Abigail's change now is also kind of interesting. Now, again, the reoccurring theme about this patch that I've noticed is that a lot of the characters feel, I don't want to say gimmicky, or a lot of the changes feel gimmicky, but it feels like they wanted to do their buffs different. And that isn't the case for some of the characters that are coming up, but let's just read as to what has been changed for Abigail. Number 1, she dispels all debuffs from her target that she puts in the backline. So she full cleanses, which is really nice. Some players will, basically get instantly debuffed, or people will put like Briar Witch Iceria unbuffable. And I'm assuming based on this is going to work more like Senya now. I don't know what the exact pace or like what the exact wording of this is, but it says now what happens is you consume 30% of the caster's health and you dispel all debuffs from the target and grant immortality and vampirism for 1 turn. Unless if I'm mistaken, this should be like Senya's, where you aren't necessarily able to just unbuffable the character the way that you would with Briar Witch Iceria against someone like BBK and just instantly pop their passive. If I'm not mistaken, this means that you should be able to get immortality at the end of the day, unless if you... No, it literally says dispel and then grants immortality. So this should be like a pretty safe way for Abigail's target to stay alive. However, keep in mind that specifically with the other changes to her kit, she now has a full like dispel all buffs from the enemy while also giving effectiveness to her attack. This is a little bit interesting, mostly because you had effectiveness already, or you had a little bit of effectiveness on Abigail in the past, but them giving more effectiveness to her just means that you get more stats. And honestly, I'm not too sure if Abigail needs more stats to make her work. Kind of the reason why Abigail wasn't used as much in the past is because she doesn't have enough pacing. Characters in general that don't have some super nuke and are used in RTA right now, or even in Guild War and Arena, aren't really used that often, just because you need to have some superpower built into your kit. Like you need to have Senya's, oh well, okay, not only can you not hit my backline target, if you hit my backline target, I can throw the moon at you. Like, okay, that's kind of powerful, which is ridiculous. But then Abigail, while cleansing and making things very helpful, especially if you're going to pair someone like Abigail alongside someone like Briar, or someone like Janua rather, she still ends up getting, or she still should, in theory, be able to get, destroyed or demolished, basically, I think, by someone like Knockwall. Alternatively, I don't think Abigail is currently in a state where she's so tanky that you could not, or like she could prevent herself from getting one shot, which also makes things really goofy. Again, it'll kind of depend, I think, on this whole debuff targets thing, because truth be told, there isn't a lot stopping players from just one-shotting the Abigail or dealing with the Abigail herself. And although she does gain the effectiveness buff, and although she still does dispel and, apply the injury, this is, again, not the same as like a Senya who gives herself, insane pacing with her speed buff. It's not the same as her having the, the nuking potential or the ticking time bomb of other characters. Long story short, I don't know why anyone would pick Abigail over Senya, unless you don't have Senya, of course, which makes sense. But at that point, I think there are other characters that are definitely worth picking over Abigail. Although, sincerely, I do think that more testing, I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but specifically, especially for Abigail, this Blood Banquet change is definitely really interesting, because I don't know if this is going to be enough to warrant people picking this. It could be similar to how some people live and die by picking Christie and like Gala in the backline. Like some people will say it's really bad, but then there are players that have really high win rates with it. So whatever the case is, we'll see how it pans out. I think the effectiveness is nice because it's free stats, but the big change here is definitely the full cleanse for the target that you put in the backline. The next character that we have changed here is Alencia, and this is kind of funny. Now, again, a lot of the changes up above were definitely more experimental, kind of kind of interesting. They weren't necessarily changes that people knew that they had to have. They're not like the same as, you know, when Pirate Captain first, you know, had her crit removed from her S1. Not quite like that. They're a bit more experimental. Alencia's is one of those changes, though. It's been a long time coming, and what they decided to do, or what they decided on, was that Alencia just didn't have enough stats. She needed a little bit of love. So what they did was they gave her artifact and they gave a set to her for free. So okay, interesting enough. But now you basically have double the value of her own artifact, which is really interesting. You gain the crit chance, you get the increased combat readiness after you've done trample. And the other thing is that with Mind's Eye, the buff now says instead of giving you effectiveness, when you attack, you apply injury. Okay, so basically they gave the set and the artifact to Alencia, which is really nice. But truth be told, it's tough to say whether or not that's still enough to make her relevant. They did also change her EE, if you see right here, to now increase the combat readiness that she gives herself by 20% when she uses her S3, which is really nice. But remember the characters that Alencia is dealing with right now, right? Arguably, in some cases, maybe now she has a better matchup against characters like, I don't know, maybe ML Shu, she has a little bit better of like a matchup against. However, as you can see here, there are a lot of times where providing buffs to the team is really important. And Alencia, though normally able to strip, doesn't even have the strip now on her S3, or doesn't guarantee herself the S3 strip, which is fine. But again, there are so many characters nowadays that kind of make it tough to pick how should I even describe this? Like, a lot of characters you pick nowadays in RTA have to, or just in general, have to not only cover cleave or anti-cleave, it also has to cover standard options. And that's why characters like Navy Captain are really good. That's why characters like Emma Bologna, well, Emma Bologna is kind of 50-50 against cleave, but just in general, you need to have characters that are decent in cleave. A Tywin specifically is why, or the reason why A Tywin's so good right now is because he does really good in all kinds of play. And we'll see whether or not Alencia is really good for this specifically. I could see her maybe being picked if you know that someone's committing fully to a slow playstyle. But I don't know the last time that someone, you know, picked someone like, I don't even know like what a full HP scaler is, but I can't imagine someone picks a full HP scaler and then doesn't either pivot into cleave or aggro, or like doesn't pick like Gala to one-shot the Alencia. It feels like this is a weird change. Not because, you know, she doesn't deserve all the things that she wants here, because they're fantastic. They're literally what she needed. And like, no, let's not get it twisted. The, you know, the 100% chance to defense break, in addition to ignoring ER, is fantastic. You can now, like, in some cases, maybe finish off the pesky Destino, or the pesky, you know, like, whatever healer you want to talk about, or, you know, ER character that you want to refer to here. This is pretty insane. But truth be told, it's kind of coming at a weird time, because Ravi has been buffed, and Ravi definitely beats the living crap out of Alencia. And just in general, there's so many cleave characters, or characters that kind of deal with Alencia well. I mean, if you have Knockwall or DDR, they're not, you know, Alencia can't do anything. Alencia's not cleansing. Alencia doesn't have some way to deal with any of these things. And these are some of the most popular characters in the game. Maybe Alencia has a good matchup against Laia, though. Who knows? Ultimately, though, again, the Laia could just take Fire Ravi, and then, okay. Anyways, that's Alencia. I think, again, she'll be really cool for slower players, but truth be told, again, I don't know how many people are really going to pick or commit to them. And then we have the last and final 4-star from this whole list, which is going to be the Shooting Star Cades change. Now, here's the thing that's kind of interesting about this. Shooting Star Cades is good sometimes when you have like a specific idea or game plan. And there are some people that will pick ER Kayron, ER ML Kayron, and then pick the Shooting Star Cades, guarantee the playstyle, and then boom, now you have to deal with this character that cannot die no matter what, has like 3 turns immortality, and you're like, what the hell is this? This, for the purposes of PvP, will probably not change much. You have characters like Briar, which I Syria. You have characters pretty much all across the board that sleep characters like this, just because they have so many free stats and they have the ability to unbuffable you, or, you know, basically remove all chances of you living. And even despite her having the full cleanse with her Sparkling Star here, that's most of the time not enough to prevent you from dying. This doesn't prevent you from getting reset by Knockwall, and I know you're gonna, you know, you're probably tired of hearing about these characters, but if you guys have played RTA, you've played Guild War, you've played Arena, these are the characters you're gonna see all the time. And the issue here is that Shooting Star Cades is nothing against these. Her counterpart, which is Light Cades, does do something against, DDR and stuff like that if he chooses to press his buttons. But truth be told, Shooting Star Cades, I think for a lot of players, was either a super cheese thing you bust out in a tournament, like a friendly tournament or something, or you used her for the Eupine Lab. If you aren't familiar with Eupine Lab, I have a video that I'll on my other channel. It's like how to get free secret way to get charms, I think is the name of the video if you want to look it up. But that's what I found her to be best with. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, this nerfs her usage in the Eupine Lab, which is kind of annoying, actually, because although I appreciate the attack buff and I appreciate the immortality, I also kind of liked I think it was immunity that you could get from Shooting Star Cades, which was kind of annoying. Whatever the case is, it's a fine change. I don't think it changes much. I kind of wish that they did more for her. Maybe something like, at the start of her turn, she cleanses all debuffs from her. She doesn't even have anything to buff herself. And although I understand that attack buff and the immortality is very strong, like, they're not unstrippable. They're not, she doesn't have built-in 300 ER or something. It's not like she gives herself immortality. It's kind of a weird change because, again, changing to attack and immortality is not what makes her amazing or strong. And although you could argue that she could be built like tanky and stuff, there are so many characters in the game that have ignore effect resistance like debuffs, or they have basically so much effectiveness that Shooting Star Cades doesn't do anything. So I think it's an interesting change to try and make her a bit more versatile or a bit more consistent, but this is kind of the inconsistent character, and just because she's more consistent doesn't mean that her level of play has changed in terms of strength. This is still pretty much the same character, but got a change, and Smilegate can say that they changed her. Kind of feels like a weird, unnecessary buff, though. I wouldn't say unnecessary, but kind of like a wasted potential buff, because not only did they nerf my Eupine Lab, in a sense, they also just didn't... They're going to say, well, guys, look, like, we've changed Shooting Star Cades. We're not going to touch her anymore, but the buff basically didn't do anything to her, which is interesting. Now, the changes to the 5-star artifacts here are pretty cool, to be honest. Again, to preview a little bit. The crit chance being increased is just nice for those of you that want to, I guess, use any AoE on a ranger specifically. There aren't that many characters that I can think of that actually desire this that much. I guess this is fine if you want to put this on your Commander Pavel, if you're someone that still uses that character. In some cases, I guess if you're fighting Wyvern and for some reason you need the extra damage to beat up the Wyvern, SSBs, or SSB's damage on the first wave will get buffed by this, but then it's still worse than Daydream Joker. Kind of a weird thing, and they already give us some free artifacts like every year anyways for dealing bonus damage against monsters and stuff. So this is an interesting change, but I'm struggling to find a character that would actually need this. Arguably, a character like Biblis may be able to use this, but Biblis sometimes doesn't even want crit. Sometimes they're just attack, or sometimes they're just tanky. In general, again, I don't really know who is going to use this. They just, I think, wanted to touch artifacts, or they were running out of artifacts that weren't super great and they weren't touched on before, and that's why they touched this artifact. I don't have a real reason as to why they would have touched this artifact, aside from the fact that it's not used, but 10% crit chance is not going to make it any more useful than before. I guess it's just more options for free-to-play players, which is, to be fair, a pretty justifiable reason to buff something or give, an artifact a buff. But I don't think anyone's going to be using this anytime soon, especially over stuff like, Symbol of Unity, stuff like Drink, even like Portrait, Guiding Light, which is like the big seller, and even stuff like Bloodstone, depending on if you're a tank. And now, this is probably the biggest change of all, and it's a little messed up because there's, as far as I could tell, no way to even get this artifact right now. But they buffed Amid's artifact, so now if you end up using its effect, which is if you do a non-skill twice or a non-attack skill twice, you now have a 100% chance to give the crit damage buff that was formerly kind of 50-50 on a target because it wasn't guaranteed. It was like formerly 35 to 75 or 35 to 70% chance in the past to proc its extra buff. Now it's 100% chance, which is really nice if you're someone that lives and dies by this artifact. And I've seen this artifact being used already on other characters aside from just Amid. I think I've seen certain characters like Brigitte and stuff maybe use this artifact. Was it Brigitte? I don't remember if it was Brigitte or maybe it was someone like Moon Bunny, whatever the case is, this buff is pretty interesting. Not only because, again, now it's a 100% chance, but they've effectively gone and like retroactively changed the limited artifact to work similarly to like artifacts like Rengar's Drink and stuff like I guess it's not the same, but like for certain artifacts where or like Sweet Miracles, I guess is the other comparison here, where it's not technically it's not technically a collab, so it'll come back in the future. Like we know for sure it'll come back in the future, but it's an artifact that has a chance effect that gets increased when you have it. So it kind of incites FOMO into you. But the crazy thing is that they've incited this FOMO off of the banner. So it's not even like you could go back and upgrade it or like pull for more copies of it now. All you could do is bottle it. But it's just a weird choice because, of course, you would have honestly expected this to be the case at the start of the mid banner as opposed to later. But they kind of just, I guess, in the past are like, oh man, this would be too strong, or maybe this is not worth it. Maybe it would be super imbalanced. Just saying, nah, we'll just add it. Whatever. We just made a mistake. So I guess for those of you that have a mid's artifact at max, congratulations. Now you have a guaranteed critical hit damage buff. But to be honest, not a lot of players I think were living and dying by whether or not this was proccing. Sometimes it's nice, and I know for a lot of players that were playing a mid Sid, it does suck if you don't get the crit damage buff, especially from Sids like, you know, S3 into the S1. But now you're just guaranteed it, so cool. But again, a mid is cool, and a lot of people, or there are players that use a mid, but a lot of them right now are actually using Ocean Breeze Luluka's artifact to kind of cheese people out, which is why I don't know how effective this is going to be. Maybe for other Soul Weavers, this will be effective. I actually, for a period, was using this on my Cleave Death Dealer Ray, who was like 265, 270. If you want to try this out and see if it's cool, it is 2 non-attack skills, and that's what Death Dealer Ray has. And if you're using someone like Sid alongside Death Dealer Ray, could be cool. But keep in mind that, of course, this is all speculation. However, guys, at the end of this all, to be honest, I think that the changes to the characters here, I think are okay, but not insane. Maybe things like the Alencia change, the Pyro Captain change, and, you know, all the Judge Kisei changes are things that are with, I guess, like characters like ML Senya, or sorry, ML Ilinov in mind, because it feels like a lot of these changes don't change their role in the game already. Like, you're not going to pick early Abigail. You're not going to pick even like third pick Abigail unless if the player or the enemy is playing something super weird, or unless if you have a super specific game plan in mind, like you want to play ML Celine or you want to play Janua. But just in general, it feels like these are not general enough changes that they make you feel safe picking them in any sort of team or in any sort of composition. So it feels weird. I think in general, though, they're interesting changes, don't get me wrong, but sometimes, or I guess in this case, they feel like, at least on paper, they fall flat a little bit. Again, Judge Kisei's change sounds kind of nice. Hopefully you don't get one shot, though. That was kind of the whole point of Judge Kisei and the non-attack or the unable to counter thing. Pirate Captain Fla originally, you know, wanted the effectiveness and stuff, and, you know, she, I guess, kind of was semi-reliant on not on sharing damage, and people would, you know, use Guiding Light on Captain or on Pirate Captain Fla sometimes to make sure she took even less damage. But as you're seeing here, these are changes to characters that honestly haven't been used in general that much. So, cool. And especially for Lionheart Ceremony, I like her change. But overall, I'd say that the patch is probably like a 6, maybe a 7. But they were definitely not game-breaking changes. They're interesting changes, to say the least. We'll see how they pan out, though. It's early preseason. This is how patches always go. Even if they made amazing changes now, who knows? Harsetti probably says something like, we steal your credit card and your social security. Anyways, that's going to be it for this video, though, guys. Decent patch, I guess. They hit on characters definitely that needed a little bit of love, but maybe next time we could touch some of the other 4 stars or something. These definitely didn't feel like the most necessary changes relative to some of the 4 stars or 3 stars that exist in the game. But again, I get it. 5 stars sell, and it is what it is. Thanks again for watching, though. I hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something. If you did, make sure to check out the rest of my socials. Thank you again for all the support you guys have given me. And yeah, good things are coming to epicseven. Cool things are coming to epicseven. I'm excited for it. If you didn't know already, by the way, by these videos. I'm definitely not quitting the game. I'm still a part of my guild, so at the very minimum, I have to do my guild wars. But yeah, thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you on the next time or in the next video. Yeah, it's late. Good night.